I've had the opportunity to cover a lot of mafia stories in my life, and also the connection of sports to especially the Montreal and East Coast mafias, Hamilton, Halifax, Moncton, St. John. But this case is so bizarre that unless it really happened, nobody would believe it. At one point, he was considered pretty well a top five fighter in Canada. Ended up being murdered because of his connections to the mafia, his deep connections, and as we like to say in the North Shore, what goes around comes around. Today we're going to be talking about the boxing life and the gangster life of Eddie Melo. Now, Eduardo Manuel de Melo, nicknamed Eddie the Hurricane, born July 31st at São Miguel, Azores in Portugal, was a Portuguese-born Canadian boxer and, of course, eventually became a gangster with the Cotronis. Now, born in São Miguel in the Azores archipelago, he grew up in Toronto where his father worked in construction. He arrived in Canada on October 5th, 66. He recalled about his youth in a working class neighborhood. I was always fighting. If I had a black eye, I didn't put on dark glasses to hide it. If I got a little scratch and came home bleeding, my mother would go crazy. But the way I figured it, you can't give pain to somebody else and not expect to get a little bruise yourself. In 71, his lifelong obsession with boxing started after he watched the famous Joe Frazier versus Ali fight on March 8, 71 on his family's TV. Now, when he dropped out of high school in grade 9 and with a forged birth certificate, he moved to Verdun, Quebec, where he worked as a boxer. As an amateur, he won 93 matches while losing only 4. Melo made his debut as a pro boxer in Montreal on March 7, 1978, at the age of 17. His boxing style gave him a nickname, the Hurricane. Of course, Reuben Hurricane Carter was the first one to have such a sobriquet. Spider Jones said of Melo, Eddie Melo filled the Montreal Forum at 18 years old. His explosive power punching style made him one of Canada's most exciting fighters of our time. Now, I read quite a bit of his early career because he was very often in Ring Magazine. He won his first 12 matches in a row in 78 and 79, with the majority being by KO. In 79, he became the Canadian middleweight boxing title holder. He rapidly became a favorite of boxing fans in Montreal, and over the course of his first 18 months as a pro boxer, Melo earned $150,000, making him the best paid boxer in Canada. The journalist James Kernaghan described the young Melo. He was fast, a terrific puncher, and he could take a punch. Growing into a light heavyweight, he was still moving them down. Of any Canadian boxer in the past 50 years, the guy who looked like a young Anthony Quinn had world champion written all over him. Now, on Halloween night 1978, de Melo fought someone that's very close to my immediate family, Fernand Marcotte. Marcotte also later fought Duran and fought my cousin Ronald Savoy for the Canadian super middleweight boxing title. He took on Fernand Marcotte at the Verdun Auditorium in a match that lasted 10 rounds and ended up with Melo winning by split decision. In their second match, Marcotte won a majority decision. The final match in the famous rivalry ended in a draw. The fights between Eddie and Marcotte were regarded as some of the best boxing matches ever in Montreal. In 81, Melo finally became old enough to box in Ontario. Now, one of Melo's fans was the gangster Frank Cotroni of the Cotroni family in Montreal. Now, this mafia had connections to many people over the years, including athletes, Donald Trump, various movie stars, music stars in Quebec and Acadie. Now, Cotronis, again, were very, very connected, as we say. He came to enjoy a friendship with Cotroni, whom he called my number one fan. Kernaghan wrote that Melo appeared to have been depressed after losing a title match for the Canadian Light Heavyweight Championship in Montreal on March 11, 1980 to world-ranked Gary Summerhays, which caused him to draw closer to Cotroni. In 1980, Melo was convicted of stabbing a bouncer with a pocket knife during a bar brawl, for which he served 90 days in jail. Melo was to be convicted 8 more times over the course of the rest of his life on charge of extortion or illegal weapons possession. In the early 80s, his boxing career went into decline, with him losing a match by knockout to the journeyman Ralph Hollett in Toronto in January 81, an upset that badly damaged his career. Later in 81, Melo was convicted of uttering death threats. The Cotroni controlled Local 75 of the Hotel and Restaurant Employees Union, fought with the United Food and Commercial Workers Union for the right to represent airport strip workers at Pearson in Toronto. A bartender at the Pearson Airport bar complained to police that Melo had pulled a loaded handgun to his head and asked him, "You don't want anything to happen to your baby or wife, do you?" Melo denied the allegation to the police and then added that he never used a gun when threatening people, as he clenched his fists and said, I have my own weapons, these two. Now, on May 4th, 82, Melo had a much publicized match against Jimmy Gradson at a Cine Coliseum in Toronto that had been promoted by George Chavallo. Prior to the match, both men had taken to insulting each other in public, and by all accounts, the two boxers didn't like each other. The match was extremely hard-fought one, with Judge Jackie Silver saying, "I've seen a lot of fights, but never war like this." The first 3 rounds of the Gradson and Melo match were described as leaving the audience breathless with excitement. Gradson eventually won the match by knockout to 10th. The last noteworthy fight by Melo was when he defeated via knockout the former Canadian lightweight champion Gary Summerhays in June '83 in that much publicized rematch. Now, Melo, personal life was quite interesting. He had married a former Miss Montreal Alouette cheerleader. He used his boxing wealth to buy a Lincoln automobile, a house in Toronto, and some 20,000 worth of jewelry. It was felt that Melo suffered from poor management, and his managers kept pushing him too hard, too fast, when he began to show signs of brain damage caused by his boxing. One of his friends, the gangster, outlaw biker, and fellow boxer Bernie the Frog Guindon, thought it was wrong for Melo's manager to have him fight the top pro boxers while he was still a teenager, saying he was young and he just didn't care. They threw him in with the top fighters. Guindon felt that Melo had won the middleweight boxing championship at the age of 19 would have benefited him if he'd been able to mature more as a boxer before him being booked to fight the top boxers. Now, the hitman Réal Simard served as the Toronto representative of the Cotroni family starting in July of '83. Cotroni would visit Toronto about once every month to see Simard, and during these visits, Melo would serve as a chauffeur and bodyguard. A police checkup of Melo revealed that he was working as an organizer for Local 75 of the Hotel and Restaurant Employees Union, a union allegedly so corrupt that it had been expelled from the Fédération des Travailleurs et Travailleuses de Québec under the grounds that the union was controlled by Cotroni and it represented the interests of management instead of the workers. During one of these visits to Toronto, Cotroni went to Little Italy neighborhood to meet with Rocco Zito, the leader of the Cenero group of the Negranieta. Starting in October '84, a royal commission under Justice Raymond Bernier of the Quebec Sports Safety Board examined mafia influence within boxing. Between October '84 and July '85, the Bernier Commission interviewed 105 people, and in its report presented in March '86 concluded that the boxing industry in Quebec was systematically corrupt and under control of Cotroni, who was an avid boxing fan. Bernier wrote that Cotroni was the guiding spirit of boxing in Montreal, and the fights in Montreal were probably rigged to allow Cotroni to profit by betting against the boxers favored to win fights. The report listed Melo as one of the boxers who was associated with Cotroni. The Bernier Commission report was so damning in its revelations of corruption in boxing that the report was censored by the Quebec government, and the full report has never been released to the public. It is believed that Melo's sudden career decline in the early '80s, after a promising start in the '70s, was due less to a decline in his boxing abilities and more to him intentionally losing fights against inferior opponents to allow Cotroni to profit by betting against him. It was an open secret in the 1980s that Cotroni controlled boxing in Canada and that the Canadian boxing matches were rigged for his benefit, often in a clumsy and flagrant fashion, as one policeman recalled. Sometimes he missed a guy and he still fell down. The OPP believed that Melo as a boxer was under control of Cotroni. The police believed that the way that Melo lost fights in the '80s against opponents whom he was wildly expected to defeat were the result of match rigging, with the popular rumor at the time being that Cotroni bribed boxers to lose by supplying them with free heroin, which could be either used and or sold. With his career in decline, Melo retired in 1986. During his boxing career, he won 24 matches out of 44, 32, 9 and 2. Now, here's where it gets complicated. Melo, at the time of his retirement, went to work as an organizer for, again, the Hotel Employees and Restaurant Employees Union, and then the vending machine business. He was known for his aggressive style both in and outside the ring, with many finding his temper to be quite ungovernable. His real job as the agent for Cotroni Family Toronto was bringing in strippers and video game machines from Montreal to various TO bars. The previous Cotroni family representative for Toronto, the hitman Simard, had turned Crown's evidence, thus required a replacement. Johnny Papalia. Yes, I've covered that guy before. The boss of the Papalia family came to test Melo once telling Cotroni, "Put a leash on Melo or I'll kill him." A policeman told a reporter from Toronto Sun newspaper about Melo. He was muscled, but it was not a freelancer. He would look after Cotroni's problems. Now, in '89, at a pool hall in College Street, he assaulted a mafioso after words had been exchanged, which led to a murder plot against him, with a hitman being hired to kill him. The hitman eventually turned informer, and the police faked the murder of Melo with a photograph being taken of a crash test dummy designed to look like Melo being shot up and covered in fake blood. The hitman showed the photographs of the crash test dummy and was paid for the supposed murder, leading to those who had paid him being charged with conspiracy to commit murder. In April '89, his first marriage ended in divorce, with his ex-wife, Sini, moving to Vancouver with their 2 daughters. In 1990, the charges against Melo for conspiracy to commit extortion were dismissed in the famous Askoff decision, when a judge ruled that Melo's constitutional right to a speedy trial had been violated, as the Crown had failed to start a trial against him 34 months after he was charged. Of course, in the current system, that would have been thrown out completely. In '91, a mafioso and the owner of Toronto's Casket Royale funeral home, Gaetano Guy Penapinto, had one of his business partners, Natal Rhoda, tried to assassinate the man behind the plot against Melo. Rhoda was carrying a bomb with the aim of avenging Melo, but the bomb exploded prematurely, costing him much of his arm. Penapinto was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder. It is believed that Penapinto had been hired by Cotroni. Later in '91, he was convicted of assault after he used his boxing skills to beat up a man during a brawl at a stag party, for which he was served 90 days in prison. Now, in the early 1990s, he was often photographed eating at a Yorkville restaurant with a visiting Vancouver area Hells Angel who worked as a loan shark. In '93, a police report listed Melo as a member of the Salerno group. The Hells Angels whom Melo met was Lloyd Louis Robinson, the half-brother of the Angels Vancouver East End chapter president, John Bryce. The 2 men actually had the same mother. The police believed that Bryce was just a front man, and that Robinson was a real president of the East End chapter. He served as a principal contact between the East End chapter of the Hells Angels with the Cotroni family of Montreal and the Commisso Nidra of Toronto, creating a cross-Canada alliance. This was before, the Montboucher years. Robinson, after visiting Toronto and wherever he was in TO, he met Melo at Yorkville restaurants such as Remy's and The Pilot. Melo and Robinson were often photographed by RCP surveillance teams, talking with 3 Commisso brothers, namely Rocco Remo, Kissimo, and Michel. Likewise, Melo would frequently visit Vancouver, and during his visits to the West Coast, he was also always a guest of honor at the Angels East End chapter clubhouse. One of Robinson's interests was having a French-Canadian strippers from Quebec work in strip clubs in the Lower Mainland. Robinson's company, That's Entertainment Incorporated, was one of the 3 largest strippers agencies in the Lower Mainland. That's Entertainment was owned by 399413 Alberta Limited, whose reports in '93 and '94 listed Ken Lelich and Robinson as the 2 directors. Likewise, Robinson was a pioneer in internet pornography, as the company StarNet Computer Communications, which was owned by That's Entertainment, had the world's first live feed internet strip show in May '95 and was the first internet company to have its own secure credit card interface. Now, in early '94, he decided to resume his boxing career, hiring the Israeli-Canadian businessman Harold Arvey as his manager. Arvey was a flamboyant character, well-known in Toronto, who had gone to prison for 4 years, starting in '86, for hiring the Commisso Nidra and the Satan's Choice hitman and bomber Cecil Kirby to blow up a disco in 1980 in order to allow him to collect the insurance money. Your typical 1980s Canadian style of mafia hit. Arviv was given to flaunting his wealth, and he owned a luxury yacht, the Problem Child, that was worth $170,000 that he used to sail Lake Ontario with. Previous yachts owned by Arviv had been named Monkey Business and Misbehavior, a choice of names that said much about his personality. In March '94, Melo and Arviv called a press conference where he talked grandly about plans for Melo to perform a comeback tour of Europe, a tour that never occurred. In August '94, he was recorded by police wiretap talking to Cotroni family member Tony Valpato when he said, "I went there and he had the meeting. I had a couple of guys. We took care of things. You know what I mean? Went down and took care of things, so there's no problem. So what I'm doing, I think, is the right thing for us to fuck the other guy." Now, before Melo could resume boxing, later in '94 was discovered he had never taken Canadian citizenship. thus leading for the government to order him deported to Portugal. He fought against the deportation order, arguing, "My parents brought me here for a better life. I did everything in Canada. Had $2 and now a baby. And I have to add a lot of trouble here too." In an immigration hearing, he admitted that one of his close friends was Joe Diardo, a leg and arm man who had 30 convictions going back to 58 for arson, for passing counterfeit money, robbery, and for possession of illegal drugs. Melo described Cotroni as one of his best friends and admitted that Volpato was the godfather to one of his daughters. Melo always admitted to being a godfather to one of RV's daughters. Melo was then asked why he should be allowed to stay in Canada, giving association with known criminals as Cotroni, Arviv, and Volpato, leading him to reply, "All I know is that we've been okay with me. They've never asked me to do any criminal activity or get into trouble. They've only been supportive of whatever it was that I had to do." Melo's friendship with Arviv ended a bitter dispute over money. Now, Melo remained a celebrity in Toronto, attending the 1998 Toronto International Film Festival, where he posed for photographers with his second wife, Rhonda, whom it was noted resembled Pamela Lee Anderson. At the same time, he claimed to be taking drugs to control his anger, saying he was trying to reform. However, the police remained suspicious of Melo, noting he was still working an all-cash vending machine business, though Melo complained that police surveillance made it difficult for him to work in the vending machine business. The police also noted that Melo listed his annual income when filing taxes as being about $24,000, yet he lived in a condo on Lakeshore Boulevard West that cost $2,000 per month, paid $1,500 in child support to his ex-wife every month, owned another condo in Queens Quay, and owned 2 vehicles, a Jaguar and a sports utility vehicle. Now, he also served as a mentor to his fellow Portuguese-Canadian gangster, Johnny Raposo. Raposo was so close to Melo that he was known as his clone, or as Little Eddie, as Raposo took to dressing, speaking, and having the same mannerisms as Melo. Melo was considered to be a legend in the Little Portugal neighborhood on College Street, and Raposo idolized him. Raposo followed Melo's advice as he accepted his aphorisms, such as "a jealous man is a dangerous man," "the phone is just for ordering pizza," and "a hungry man is a dangerous man," as advice to live by. Eddie also advised Raposo to never answer the door on Halloween, saying that Halloween was a dangerous holiday for gangsters, and it was dark on October 31st, and that there were too many people wearing masks on All Hallows Eve, making it all too easy for hitmen to don a mask and strike on Halloween. Melo came to prefer mortgage fraud and stock market fraud in his last years, while his protege Raposo became one of the biggest cocaine dealers in Toronto, buying from the Sinaloa cartel of Mexico. So, as we go along, this is what happened. I stopped covering the Quebec Mafia, started covering the Montboucher years in New Brunswick, but I kind of lost track of him because, it was big with the boxing fraternity in Northern Shore, how this guy went on. Now, but get this. Our eyes opened around Easter in April of 2001, on the 6th of April of that year. Melo planned to go out with his wife Rhonda to attend a concert by, of all people, Andrea Bocelli at the Air Canada Centre. At about 5:15 p.m., he went to Amiki Sports Cafe in Mississauga to meet his friend Johnny Pavot. At about 6:25 p.m., Melo was in a parking lot talking to him when the hitman Charles Gagné shot Melo in the head and then killed Pavot as an inconvenient witness. Melo's murder is generally believed to have been ordered by the Toronto Camera de Control, or Border Control, the governing body for the local clans. On April 8, 2001, Rhonda's daughter Jessica and his brother Tony, along with Rhonda's brother, were all charged with obstruction of justice and assault after he attacked the officers of the Peel Regional Police who tried to seize Melo's Jaguar for evidence. Now, Melo's daughter Jessica, who was studying criminology at Simon Fraser University at the time of his murder, told the media he was the most amazing father, friend, confidant, supporter, everything. "I couldn't have asked for a better person to be my father. I was with him for 19 years. I went everywhere with him." Now, Gagné was promised to be paid $75,000 for killing him. In his testimony during the Silva trial, Gagné claims to have not been paid the amount promised to him. Gagné was a career criminal from Montreal who was on parole for armed robbery when he took the contract on Melo's life. Now, how this worked back then, ladies and gentlemen, you would put a contract on a certain person under the table. If you fulfilled the contract and prove it, you were paid. So Gagne was just looking, and don't forget the word Gagne in mafia terms means he was winner or Gagne. Now, on 30th of September 2003, he pled guilty to second-degree murder after striking up a sweetheart deal and a promise of financial security by the Crown attorney Steve Sheriff and the Crown star witness Fernando Ribeiro. Gagne was sentenced to life in prison, being eligible for parole after 12 years in exchange for testifying against his employer, a deal that the Crown and his witness Ribeiro contrived. Now, the Melo family has been forewarned by detectives not to trust Ribeiro. Gagne received funds in his canteen from Ribeiro along with his wife Maria. In total, Gagne has received $80,000. In 2016, Gagne remarried, and Ribeiro also provided the wedding rings, an envelope containing an undisclosed amount of money. The police believe that Melo's murder was linked to an historical conflict within the mafias in Ontario and that the organization has had with other Italian criminalized groups in Canada. In 2005, a Toronto businessman, Manuel de Silva, went on trial with the Crown alleging that he hired Gagne to kill Melo. The trial ended with de Silva acquitted. Gagne has often applied for parole, but the fact he committed 2 murders while on parole for armed robbery has made his applications controversial. Melo's daughters, along with other family members, are vehemently opposed to his release on parole, arguing the fact that he killed while on parole in 2001 makes him undeserving of freedom again. On the 18th of February 2022, Gagne was denied full parole, but was granted criminal release. Now, here's the weird point is, ladies and gentlemen, we always thought that Eddie was going to be a world champion, and no doubt he had enough talent to be one of those fighters. But we knew something was going on because how many people thought he was taking dives? Well, like he won several consecutive fights at the end of his career, but the fights against Don Hurdle, Ralph Hollett, and Jimmy Gradson were kind of confusing a lot of people. Lancelot Innes as well, and those 2 losses against Ralph Hollett kind of were making people wondering, was he taking a dive or and fighting in somebody like Vidi Corto, where he lost a unanimous decision in 1979, and the loss to Marcotte was getting, people were saying, was it real or was just like mafia money that he was paid off, sort of like a Jake LaMotta type situation. We'll never know the full story because no member of the Montreal media or the Toronto media covers the boxing mafia as much as did before. I think the last person to be covering that aspects of the boxing mafia, either have died or, are in retirement or is what they call journalistic dementia. We don't want to remember what we covered back in the day. But all I remember when he was moving up in the ranks, people were saying he's either mafia connected or connected to the U.S. controlled boxing, which went Don King or Bob Arum or whatever, because he went from 0 to overnight. You don't do that in Canada. And the glory years of the lower weights in Canada were the mid-1970s to early 1980s, the Hilton, Clyde Gray, or whatever. And, he was part of that, and he had talent. But like I said, wrong place, wrong time, and wrong, I don't know, it sounds weird, but wrong mafia. After a while, they're bound to get you. But every time I look at a movie like Goodfellas, I look at the movie like The Godfather, I'd like to see a fictionalized version of this guy's life, like somebody, involved in the Montreal and Toronto mafia and being a big boxer and coming out of it. It'd be amazing. So that's the interesting story of Elie Melo. If it wouldn't have happened, nobody would believe it. So if you like what you're doing here with our boxing podcast, let us know with a like, comment, subscribe, or share.